Hey, hello everyone. I'm Stephanie Subcheck, and this is Ann Lister's study of geology. Very pleased to be here, and I've been looking forward to doing this presentation for you. So first, I'd like to just give a little background of why geology. Of all the things Ann Lister, what was the thing that caught my eye? So I'll share a little bit about me first. So I come to you from Madison, Wisconsin in the U.S. I have been a lover of rocks since I was a child, but I am not a trained geologist in any way, so that's just a caveat. Just a bit of a hobbyist. I did learn about minerals and mineral collecting when I attended a vacation around Lake Superior and stopped at the A.E. Seaman Mineral Museum at Michigan Tech University. And it is well known as one of the top 5 museums in the Western Hemisphere, at least. And that really got me interested in minerals. And since then, I have collected minerals myself in my home state of Wisconsin, northern Michigan, Oregon, South Dakota, New Jersey, Maine, and Ontario, and actually wherever I see a cool rock. I am a recent past president of the Madison Gem and Mineral Club, which is established in 1960s. So rocks really are my hobby in a lot of ways. So how did I get connected with Ann Lister and geology and minerals? Well, obviously I came to know Ann Lister through Gentleman Jack, and that led me to the books. And in reading the journal transcriptions, I kept running into references to geology and minerals pretty much all throughout her life. And as I developed a passion for collecting myself, and this is just a snapshot of my rainbow shelf here, I got very interested in kind of how she came to being interested in minerals and mineral collecting. So what I'd like to do first is give you a little bit of background about geology as a science and how it developed over time, and why Ann's lifetime was really a very prime time in history to be interested in geology. So in antiquity, really the story of geology was described via storytelling as a means to explain our various geological phenomena. So in the Americas, the indigenous people would talk about Turtle Island in First Nations belief systems about the land masses, and also that our ancestors' spirits inhabited stones. And you can carry this type of knowledge across to the UK. One of my favorite stories is around the fossil oyster, or Graphea, found along the UK coast. And these were explained as being devil's toenails, which really dissuaded collectors for a number of centuries. And so they were easily found when people started doing mineral collecting. So it gives you an idea of kind of how the interest in geology really stemmed from very early days. So I would say that in the evolution of geologic understanding, of course, we can go back to the Greeks and Aristotle, who was the first documented way of theorizing that the Earth really changed in a very slow way, and you could not observe it in a lifetime. From there, Pliny the Elder was the first to describe crystal habits of diamond, and he also documented the correct origin of amber and what it was, and described metals. Even Sina in the 10th century described the Earth's terrain, the origin of earthquakes, and also the formation of minerals. Shen Kuo in China in the 11th century was an early theorist about geomorphology and soil erosion, sedimentary uplift, and also why marine fossils were located hundreds of miles from the sea. The development then kind of spanned into the 17th century. Nicholas Steno was considered the father of geology. And then really the seminal text was by William Winston, 1699, who authored A New Theory of the Earth. And that really stimulated a lot of interest in geology. So I like to say that geology interest in it erupted during Ann's lifetime. And there really were a lot of reasons for this. For one thing, challenging Christian biblical explanations for natural phenomena became a bit more accepted. Certainly wasn't always accepted. There were many, many debates around that, but it was not quite as taboo to have a scientific explanation for phenomena. Also, the emerging industrial age created a lot of economic drivers for use of the Earth's resources. At the time, mining, which historically had been small local operations, became more large scale, and investment in mining began. Also, classification systems really became all the rage through a number of sciences in botany and paleontology and geology and chemistry. The way of understanding the world was developed through classification systems. Sociopolitically, the early government funding of geological surveying and mapping really boosted the scientific study of geology. And in fact, the Geology Society was established in 1807. Through my review of this, one of the things I'm always taken with is how accurate many of the early scientists really were. You know, drawing maps without the benefit of a view from space, explaining the strata of the Earth without the benefit of core drilling miles into the Earth's surface, crystallography and high-powered microscopy. They really were pretty close based on what we can use our knowledge looking back. So that always amazed me. So Anne's interest in geology stemmed from a lot of different reasons. Anne's land really became an important part. You know, it all started with her general interest in scientific knowledge. But as she became a landowner, she needed to understand how she could leverage the resources she had to create income. And so in particular, understanding geology led to the need to know how to mine and if there was any possibility of further mining for coal in Shibden Estate. And that really led to a much more prominent interest in geology. And the geology texts are mentioned throughout the journals over a number of years. And this is not an exhaustive list in any way of the numbers of texts that she took advantage of through her study of geology. But I do want to make a particular mention of Bakewell's geology. And that is what really caught my eye in the journals, is it kept coming up. And so I took an interest in this particular text. Next slide. So Robert Bakewell was an English gentleman. He traveled extensively across the UK. He appears to be largely self-taught, but he did study other scientists. And in this text, Bakewell's Geology, he did reference Cuvier and amongst many others. He is credited with providing the most detailed description of geology in England ever produced at the time. The first edition of his text was in 1813 and followed through all the way to the fifth edition in 1838. He's attributed as the author of the first geological map of Britain. He did travel to the Alps in 1822, and that is reflected in his text. He did pass away in 1834. And to my great surprise, I was able to actually obtain an 1828 London published copy of Bakewell's Geology. I got it from an online bookseller of antique books. We know from the journals that Anne acquired the 1813 edition, but also this later text, the third edition. This edition was known because of a new chapter with really detailed descriptions of the geology of England and Scotland. And Anne's mines, of course, were of particular interest. You see that on the right is Bakewell's initial colored plate of the geology of England and Wales. And if you can imagine where Yorkshire and Halifax is on this map, it was important to know. Generally, anything to the right of the green section was not coal-bearing, and so there was a limited geography to where coal could be found. But it was important, and thank you to Trish Rafa for the map here, that all the different pits of Anne's land and coal mining. So it did become important for her to understand this. So a little bit about my method and how I'm bringing to you this information today. Of course, everything starts with Anne's journals. And I was able to use the search feature to find out how many mentions and where the mentions were of geology and mineral, and of course the Bakewell text author. That led me to reading sections from Bakewell's Geology, kind of looking back at specific references to Anne journals. And also in August this last year, I went to Halifax and visited the archive service where I had requested copies of her Paris lecture notes. So it was a lot of fun drawing the threads together from these three sources. So one of the things that I did do is I have to have a graph practically in every presentation I do, but I did wanted to map out the mentions of geology and mineral to kind of take a look at what was it like throughout her lifetime, her recorded lifetime, of her interest in this. And to no one's surprise, the period of 1828 to 1833 showed a significant increase in the mentions of geology. And so this was her period of as formal learning as she could muster when she really showed an interest in geology. And later, of course, during her explorations for coal, we also saw some increase. But I thought this was a really interesting way to kind of see what her journal references look like. So next we'll go to Anne's studies in Paris and how she used that to increase her scientific knowledge of geology. So George Cuvier, of course, is a prominent mention, and her connection with Cuvier is very well documented. He is known as an early paleontologist, but he also did write on geology. And no doubt the references to the work of other scientists in the field led Anne to seek out these experts. And thanks here to Suzanne Protowskis for her presentation from previous sessions on Anne Listers and the Scientists in Paris. It's a wonderful presentation. And she was able to meet and attend lectures for Pierre Cordier, who is a geologist, mineralogist and petrograph. And there's one particular reference here of that lecture. Dr. Pelletier, a mineralogist, chemist, and pharmacist. And also André Langier, a chemist, pharmacist, and mineralogist. So there are detailed notes of attending these lectures and what she recorded in her notebooks. So it was a great thrill to have her Paris notebooks in hand. Was quite an amazing experience. And of course, took her notes mainly in French. Just one of the things that was of interest is on occasion, looking through those notebooks, she would flip the book and take notes in different directions. Not clear why that it happened. I'm surmising that perhaps she got bored and it kept her interested, but that's just my thinking. Here we see her study of the classification systems, and there are a number of these in the notes. Again, these taxonomies began with Linnaeus with a text on botany in 1735. And it was important because there was a common reference point then for scientists, no matter where they were, and a common language set. And these classification systems really enhanced the study of science across Europe, at least. And this is one of the many lectures which showed the classification of rocks and minerals. I should mention that each of the scientists tended to have their favorite way of classifying rocks and minerals, so at the time there was not one recognized methodology. You can see some of the more specific references here. On the right, she's looking at different types of basalts and the aggregates, dolerite, basalmite, basalt, the conglomerate sections. So it's a wonderful way of seeing how she was studying these various classification systems. I'm not sure what she had crossed off down there. Perhaps it was something she recorded in error, but these are great little things to see in the lecture notes. An interesting thing I came across in her notes in April 1830, there was no margin in the reference of the spectrum of visible light. So in Anne's own hand is, in French, the colors of the rainbow. When I cross-referenced her journal notes for that entry, there wasn't a specific reason for this particular entry, and it was on a Saturday. But I wanted to share that. I just thought that was kind of neat. I did do some comparisons here and there. As you can imagine, you could go very, very deep into this aspect of study. I just have one small example here. Where she made a note of a particular lecture, 5th of February, 1831, and said that she did not attend. I looked back into the journal, and there is the entry here that she determined not to go to the lecture that day to hear the continuation of the last day's subject on generation. And so, for some reason, noted that Cuvier wouldn't be there, and perhaps that was the reason she decided not to attend. So let's dive into the journal references, which really is a nice way to see the evolution of Anne's study and interest in both geology and minerals. So Anne really became a collector. She became very interested in obtaining minerals, and so she made a point of finding museums, shops, or even people who had their own private mineral collection when she was on her travels. There are also a number of mentions in the journals of her just taking time to look over her specimens herself, and sometimes purchasing specimens. There is a fairly new feature on Packed with Potential, Anne Lister's Cabinet of Curiosities, which is just a wonderful accounting of things that she collected. And if you haven't taken a look at that, I do recommend it. It's pretty neat. So the earliest reference I could find is 1816, and this is when she was traveling with Mariana Charles and Anne Belcom. And there's a reference here of she came across a personage by the name of Elias Hall, who said he was an agent to a mineralogist of London. And he had a nice shop just opposite the inn and a good collection of specimens. She said, though very dear and a bit out of her price range. She said, such things being too high for me, I bought only the small guide referred to of the mineralogy of Derbyshire. She makes a great reference here of seeing 3 beautiful large Black John vases. Black John and Blue John is actually a type of fluorite found in England. It's very beautiful. And also hard to find. And I found here an example of a Blue John vase, which might have looked like what Anne saw, from circa 1900, which could be obtained for the low price of $1,274 for a 7-inch vase. So if you do come across Blue John or Black John and it's affordable, I highly recommend obtaining some for yourself. There is more to this entry of going into the mine, and I haven't delved deeply into that yet, so to speak, but it's certainly something I can continue my studies looking into. Her friends were very aware of her interest in rocks and minerals, and there is examples here referencing Isabella, that Isabella had sent her some collection of minerals and other things. And so again, here's an example on the lower reference of showing the minerals and things from Isabella to Mariana. So a number of points in the journal she'll reference receiving things from people who were aware of his interest, her interest. The Bakewell references in the journal, the first mention of Bakewell's text is in January 1818. The entry that you see below is where she first noted picking up Bakewell and starting her study, reading chapter 1. There is certainly more mentions of Bakewell text that we'll see, and particularly 1834 and 1835. So I'll be able to show you that evolution of her interest in this particular text. There are some interesting critiques that she notes from her studies. I read with interest this 1818 entry where she noted reading Brand's Geology, a work that I do not repent having bought, though it certainly would not teach someone the science which it treats without some other help, such as Bakewell, for instance. So Bakewell really was a very favorite text of her. In fact, that was shared from others who also made a mention. She wrote down what someone else's critique was, that we are of the opinion Mr. Brand's book contains but a very superficial and in many respects inaccurate outline of Wernerian distribution of rocks. And always the critic finding things that she agreed with, like to note that in her journals. This was one of the most fascinating entries when I did my search on geology related to Mr. Christopher Rawson. She notes that Mr. Rawson has been very busy studying geology. He had a Mr. Elias Hall, a geologist himself that stands in knowledge next to Smith and Farney, and a dealer in minerals and ornamental spars. So Christopher Rawson engaged this individual to give him instruction. Indeed, a year later, there's a note that Christopher Rawson shared a text with Anne on geology, the outlines of mineralogy and geology, and an elementary introduction to mineralogy. And so I found this of interest and wondered if this wasn't in the back of Anne's mind later on as she was negotiating leases with Christopher Rawson, that she really felt she needed to bone up on her geologic knowledge. So this is one of my favorite entries that I came across. There are also references to Anne seeking a collection of her own. So while she was in Paris, she was actively looking for opportunities to obtain them. And though here she is kind of touching base with Monsieur Cordier and talking about him, that he seemed to have studied geology and that, yes, he had a collection. She mentioned that it was difficult to make much progress of study without a collection, and was told that she could get a nice one for 200 or 300 francs in Heidelberg. And she talks about perhaps going to Heidelberg someday. She was also given the name of an individual to take a look at obtaining minerals from him, said he should be happy to give him a letter, and thanked him, and that she would plan for 700 or 800 francs, might have a very sufficiently complete collection, although wasn't sure what the classification would be. So this is a nice detailed entry of her interest in gaining her own collection for study. In her learning journey, interesting here is her notation that she found the study of geology to be a bit challenging. She noted that she began to have little hope about mineralogy, and perhaps I shall learn with time and patience. She then, on that same day, went about conducting her own experiment of burning a phosphate to see the phenomenon of phosphorescence. So, and very much hands-on in her independent study. There are entries of her interest in buying collections. This notation from 1834, and this would have been when she and Anne Walker were traveling in Paris, that she went to a shop of Monsieur Deschamps to look at some very fine mineral specimens, a complete collection of the neighboring Alps, 160 specimens for mineralogy, 80 for geology, a nice size for study and portability at 3, I assume, francs per specimen. So she was, at that point in time, getting her hands on minerals. Yes, the notation that this is a complete collection is interesting. There are certainly about 5,000 known minerals at this point in time, and certainly more being discovered all the time. In August, she also noted that she sold some of the minerals that she had to a host, Monsieur Pernard. He fancied 11 minerals she left out of the box, and so she took some money for him and sold some to him. So she was a little bit of a mineral dealer herself. Anne documented that she obtained a new edition of Bakewell's text. And so she notes here that Whitley's paid Booth for Barrow's primary geology and for Bakewell's geology. So this would have been the more modern text at the time, would have been the 1828 version that I have in my hands, interestingly. She really did appreciate Bakewell. This was a very interesting notation in 1835. Read 3 or 4 pages at the beginning of Bakewell's geology, having read half through the second time over, as far as the tertiary formations, and in beginning the first part again, the third time, the clearest system of geology I have seen. And so she really did enjoy this text, and I found it to be very readable and enjoyable as well. Now we're seeing where she has some applied knowledge. This text from December 1834, where she was reading Bakewell, but she also notes that she had Joseph Mann bring her specimens coming up from her own mind. So she was very interested in seeing what they were finding in her minds as well. So that is, kind of the practical application of what she was learning. And in 1835, we see in the contractual language for the purchase of the area around Stump Cross, she notes that she reserves a power over coal luces and to get coal and other minerals, paying all reasonable damages, etc. So perhaps she was hoping to find some minerals for collecting purposes from her own works. I like to think that Anne wore out her copy of Bakewell's Geology. There is a notation here that Miss Lister will be obliged to Mr. Booth to bind Crabtree's History of Halifax and Bakewell's Geology. So she was seeking her copy to be rebound, apparently. So it might have been she wore it out. Now, one of the frustrations with Anne is all through her documentation of obtaining minerals, she didn't often tell us what minerals she was obtaining. And so in the travels in Russia here in 1839, she did a wonderful job of what most mineral collectors are looking for, is what were the specimens, malite, zircon, dioptase, and garnet, and also the locations. And so this is what a mineral collector really wants to see, and this is a great example of her giving us that information. The last entry here is on grossular, a garnet, from a fancied resemblance of the shape of a crystal to a gooseberry, which I found a bit interesting as well. Anne's humor certainly comes through on some of these entries, and I like this one related to her collection. She was pulling out from her anteroom her loose minerals, then looking over the collection of 80 specimens from Mont Blanc and the neighboring mountains that Isabella sent me from Chamonix. Not worth much, in fact. Unknowing people always more or less taken in these matters. And there are a number of humorous entries. Just didn't have the time to share all of them here. So certainly in this presentation, I've merely scratched the surface, so to speak. But like the rabbit holes of Anne Lister, we start with science, go to geology, into minerals. That leads us to her travels and collection and her texts, and buying and coal. And so there is much more that I could do along the lines of this topic. Not quite sure where I'll go from here, but I certainly do have had my interest piqued. I do have to wonder, though, what happened to Anne Lister's mineral collection? And what tends to happen sometimes when someone is a collector is the family does not know what to do with this box of rocks. And sometimes they simply scatter them out in the dirt. And so I might be romanticizing this, but I do wonder if Anne Lister's collection isn't still at Shibden, albeit scattered around, and how wonderful it would be to come across some of her mineral collections. To my knowledge, there's no accounting of that collection and it being sold or transferred to anyone. But if anyone has knowledge about that, I'd be interested to have my fantasy here disrupted. So I do want to acknowledge the individuals that were very helpful. Ruth Cummins, the archivist at the West Yorkshire Archives Service, for finding those Paris notes specific to geology for me. Thank you to Marlene and Suzanne for providing me a bit more to dig into. And for Jenna Bayer and Steph Galloway's Cabinet of Curiosities. Again, I highly recommend that you check it out. Thank you, of course, to the folks at Search for Ann Walker for me looking at those diary entries and comparisons. And of course, I should put acknowledgement here for all of the code breakers. Without them, an amateur such as myself wouldn't have a prayer of enjoying this journey. So thank you again for inviting me to present. You can find my email there. I still on the Twitter. I refuse to call it X, but I am known as Done with Dragons out there. So with that, I think, Suzanne, do we have any questions?
Yes. I'm going to start with a question. Do you know if there was any gendered aspect to collecting rocks at the time? Doesn't seem like it, but wondered if it was more about having money to acquire a specimen.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to see. I didn't see references to any other women who had the interest. Not to say that there wouldn't have been, but I definitely think one needed the resources to purchase specimens. And so that may have had an impact on that.
Okay. So another question is, do we know if Anne searched for specimen herself, for example, whilst climbing mountains?
Oh, interesting. It could be. I would bet that she brought things back with her from Mont Blanc. During her climb, she does talk about the rocks that she sees. I don't recall reading anything about bringing anything back, but I would bet, being a rock hound myself, you can't help it. You know, you saw in the presentation, I also brought a few things back from my trips to England as well.
Okay. Question from my side. Do you know how many classification systems were there at that time?
From what I can tell, there were references to at least 3 different mineral classification systems, and I'm certain there were more. But at the time, and it would be interesting study of that history, how the world settled on a particular set of classifications. I'm sure it's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so at the moment I can't see any more questions, but I'm reading beautiful job. You should write a dissertation about it. People think it was very cool. Yeah, they love to explore this aspect of our interests. I mean, it was really a new topic for our research stuff. So let's see, my computer isn't working very nice. Okay, if you want to keep your rocks looking vibrant, use water. But now they get advises how to present their rocks. And someone buried a gem near the terrace at Shipton Hall. That's interesting.
Oh.
Always bury oaks and chestnuts at Shipton Estate. Okay, so yes, so thank you very much, Stephanie, for doing this. If you like to participate in some conversation with Stephanie when we are now going to shuffle you all out into the breakup room, we will be there if you have other questions. Yeah, so I would say thank you very much. And
thank you all.